Welcome to 6,000 years of history, a history of everything and anything. In this video, we're going to learn about how the ancient Egyptians mummified their dead. To do this, however, we need to travel back over 5,000 years. So join me as we learn about ancient Egyptian mummification. First, we need to learn where the word mummy comes from. Mummy comes from the Latin word mummia, which then in turn comes from the Persian word mum, which means wax, referring to an embalmed corpse which was wax-like from the embalming process that had taken place. So, when did the ancient Egyptians start mummifying their deceased? According to research, it started somewhere around about 3500 BCE. However, the whole afterlife belief possibly began before that, around the Barbarian era, 5000 BCE, where typical food offerings and grave goods were contained in a person's grave. Mummification didn't occur here, however. Graves gradually evolved over the eras, and by the early dynastic period, 3150 BCE to 2613 BCE, the Masataba tomb had replaced the simple graves previously seen. Masatabas were seen as an eternal resting place for the body, and it was here where the soul would travel to the afterlife, though the body had to remain intact for this to happen. Once the soul of the deceased was free of the body, it would need to orient itself. For this, stories and spells from the Egyptian Book of the Dead were painted on the walls of the tomb. As well as that, inscriptions known as the pyramid and coffin text would also be drawn. These would recount the deceased person's life events. By the time of the Old Kingdom, 2613 to 2181 BCE, mummification had become a standard practice, where everybody was given mummification apart from the worst of criminals. So, what happened when a person died? When someone died, they were brought to the embalmers. The chief embalmer could easily be distinguished, as he wore a mask of Anubis. Anubis was the Egyptian god of the dead. We won't go into much detail about him now, as he honestly deserves his own video. After the body arrived, the relatives of the dead were asked what sort of service they wanted to pay for. It was widely known that if people requested inferior services to what they could afford, they could get haunted by the deceased until the decision was righted. The service they chose varied upon the others, with the most costly being as much like Osiris, the mythical first pharaoh of Egypt's ritual. According to Herodotus, who lived in the 5th century BC, these were the differences. The most expensive treatment. The brain was removed by a hook via the nostrils, while anything left unreachable was washed out with drugs. After this, a flint knife cuts through the flank where the contents of the abdomen were removed. The cavity is then cleaned thoroughly and washed, firstly with palm wine, then with an infusion of spices. Once that's done, it is filled with pure myrrh, cassia, and many other substances apart from frankincense. There, upon being sewn up again, the body is placed in natron, which was mined from dry lake beds to remove fluids for no more than 70 days. After 70 days were up, the body is washed and then dressed head to foot in linen. After this, the body is given back to relatives who have had a wooden case made, which is shaped like a human figure, which is then put in. Differences between the most expensive and second most. No incision is made, and the intestines are not removed. However, seed oil is inserted through a syringe, which stops the liquid from escaping. The body is then cured in natron for 70 days, and on the last day, the oil is drained out. With that, the body is then given back to relatives. The cheapest. Embalmers simply wash out the intestines and put the body in natron for 70 days. But what happened to the organs once they were removed? Well, they were put into 4 canopic jars, which were sealed in the tomb. The jars were shaped of the 4 sons of Horus, the 4 sons being Imset, Hapi, Duamutav, and Kabashenef. Only the heart was left in the body. However, there were differences between the periods of Egypt, such as one where the heart was put in a canopic jar instead of staying inside the body. What happened during the process of a funeral? The funeral tended to be a public affair. If affordable, women called kites Nefertitis were hired, and they would encourage people to express grief through their own cries and lamentations. These women would reference life and how suddenly death can come, but also give assurance of the eternal aspect of the soul and confidence that the dead would pass the trial of the weighing of the heart and head on into the field of reeds. When placed in the tomb, goods of all expenses would be placed with the dead. Shabti dolls would be included, as in the afterlife they would take care of the deceased's tasks. Other items, such as combs, jewellery, weapons, and favourite items, even one's pet, were also placed. Before the tomb was sealed, a priest enacted a ritual called the opening of the mouth ceremony. With this, he would talk about Isis and Nefertitis, who brought Osiris back. He did this while touching parts of the mummy with different objects. With this, he would restore the eyes, nose, mouth, and ears to the dead. The son or heir to the deceased would sometimes take the role of the priest, further linking the right between Horus and his son Osiris. When this was finished, the grave or tomb was closed, and the relatives would go back to their normal lives, while the deceased would travel towards the afterlife. And with that, we now return to the present, with you learning about ancient Egyptian mummification. Thank you very much for watching this. If you thought this was educational, why not drop it a like? Maybe share it with friends or comment to help get the video to others. And maybe subscribe? Anyway, from me, Matthew, thank you for watching.